In the quiet village of Banjoko, where the river hummed with whispers of old tales and the trees swayed to the rhythm of the wind, a brother and sister lived under the shadow of cruelty. Tajiri and Naima were not bound by blood, but had grown up together, forced to endure the wrath of their stepmother, Kezia. She was a woman with a heart colder than the mountain winds, her eyes sharp with greed, and her hands quick with punishment. Naima, gentle and kind, had always been the light in Tajiri's dark world. As children, they would run through the fields, laughing, dreaming of a future where they could escape Kezia's torment. But as they grew older, the bond they once shared began to wither. Kezia, seeing an opportunity, whispered poison into Tajiri's ears. She filled his mind with dreams of wealth, of power, of a life where he no longer had to struggle. "You are meant for greatness," she would say, her voice as smooth as honey, but as deadly as snake venom. "Why waste your life protecting a girl who will never bring you fortune?" Slowly, Tajiri began to change. His laughter became rare, his words sharper. He stopped shielding Naima from Kezia's wrath, choosing instead to watch from the shadows. He convinced himself that life was unfair, that he deserved more, and Kezia fed his hunger for more. Meanwhile, the village of Banjoko was alive with rumors. Fear lingered in every conversation, in every hushed whisper that passed from one ear to another. The warlord Kano had sent his men to search for a bride. He was a man feared across the lands, known for his ruthlessness. They said he had a heart as black as the night, that he took what he wanted without question, and now he wanted a wife. Mothers clutched their daughters close, fathers prepared to fight, but everyone knew there was no escaping Kano's wrath. The village elders prayed, hoping he would overlook Banjoko, but fate had already chosen its path. When Kezia heard of Kano's search, a wicked thought took root in her mind. She looked at Naima, young and beautiful, and saw an opportunity. A deal with Kano meant riches beyond imagination, and there was only one person standing in the way, Tajiri. With careful words and twisted truths, she told him that Naima was a burden, that her beauty was a gift that could bring them fortune. "Sell her to Kano," Kezia urged, "and we will never suffer again." At first, Tajiri hesitated. Deep inside him, the brother who once protected Naima still breathed, but greed had already wrapped its claws around him, and the promise of wealth was too tempting. He convinced himself that Naima would be fine, that she would adapt, that she was strong enough to survive. That night, as Naima sat under the moonlight, unaware of the storm about to crash upon her, Tajiri made his decision. He would trade his sister for gold, for power, for freedom. And in that moment, the bond of blood shattered, leaving behind only betrayal. Late into the night, under the flickering light of an old oil lamp, Kezia leaned close to Tajiri, her voice dripping with sweet poison. "Do you want to be a king, Tajiri, or do you want to remain a nobody forever?" Her words slithered into his mind, wrapping around his thoughts like a serpent tightening its grip. She spoke of riches, of power, of a life where he would never have to beg or struggle, and all of it could be his, if only he gave up Naima. At first, Tajiri hesitated. The memory of his childhood with Naima still clung to him, like the last breath of a fading dream. But Kezia knew how to break him. "She is nothing but a burden," she whispered. "She will marry some poor man and live a miserable life anyway. But you, my son, you were born for more." Tajiri swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he thought of the gold, the life he could have, the escape from the shadow of poverty. It was only one decision, one choice, and he would never have to look back. He convinced himself that Naima would survive, that she would be fine, that this was for the best. The next morning, when the deal was made, Tajiri could barely meet Naima's eyes. The warlord's men arrived in silence, their presence sending a shiver through the village. The air was thick with unspoken words, with fear, with the weight of what was about to happen. Naima's world shattered when she heard the truth. "No, no, you can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She turned to Tajiri, her brother, the boy who once protected her from the darkness. "Please, Tajiri, you are my brother. Please don't do this." For a moment, something flickered in Tajiri's eyes. Doubt, regret, maybe even guilt, but then he clenched his jaw, shoving away the weakness. "This is the only way, Naima," he said, his voice hollow. "You will be fine. You are strong." "Strong?" Naima's breath hitched. "You are selling me like an animal, to a monster." Tears streamed down her face, but Tajiri looked away. He had already sealed his fate. The villagers stood in silence, their faces etched with sorrow, but no one dared to step forward. Who would challenge a warlord? Who would fight against a man as ruthless as Kano? They whispered among themselves, shaking their heads, muttering prayers, but fear kept their feet planted in the dust. As the warlord's men dragged Naima away, her cries echoed through the village, a haunting melody of betrayal and heartbreak. Tajiri stood still, his fists clenched, his chest heavy with something he couldn't name. He told himself he had done the right thing, that he had secured his future, but deep inside, a part of him knew he had just sold his own soul. The ground trembled beneath the pounding hooves of black stallions as dust rose in thick clouds, choking the air with an eerie stillness. The village of Banjoko fell silent, its people frozen like statues, their faces pale with fear. He had arrived. Kano, the ruthless warlord, rode at the front of his army, his presence casting a long dark shadow over the land. His eyes, cold as steel, swept over the villagers with quiet menace. Draped in black and gold, his armor gleamed under the scorching sun, reflecting the blood he had spilled in countless battles. Behind him, his warriors sat stiffly on their horses, their faces masked, their weapons ready. No one dared to move. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Tajiri stood at the center of the village, his hands clenched into fists, his heart pounding against his ribs. This was it. This was the moment where everything changed. Beside him, Kezia's lips curled into a victorious smirk as she stepped forward, her voice smooth and unwavering. "Great Lord Kano," she said, her tone dripping with false respect. "As promised, we have what you seek." Kano's gaze flickered to Tajiri, then to the trembling figure behind him. Naima. She had been dragged from her home, her wrists bound with rope, her face stained with tears. Her heart hammered against her chest as she took in the sight of the warlord. He was taller than she had imagined, his presence suffocating. His reputation had preceded him. Stories of villages burned, men slaughtered, women taken. And now, she was about to become part of his collection. "She is beautiful," Kano finally said, his deep voice sending a chill down Naima's spine. "She will do." Naima's breath caught in her throat. "No!" she cried out, struggling against the ropes. But the warriors held her fast. She turned to Tajiri, her brother, her only family. "Please, don't let them take me." But Tajiri did not move. He did not even look at her. Kezia took the bag of gold from Kano's outstretched hand, its weight solid and real. Tajiri swallowed hard as the warlord's men brought out more chests, filled with riches beyond his wildest dreams. Gold coins, fine silks, jewels that sparkled in the sunlight. This was wealth. This was power. Naima screamed, her voice cracking with betrayal. "You're selling me! Tajiri, please!" He closed his eyes for a brief moment, but when he opened them, they were hard, empty. "It's done, Naima," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is how it has to be." Tears streamed down her face as Kano's warriors lifted her onto a horse-drawn carriage, its golden frame dazzling against the dull brown earth. It was beautiful, lavish, fit for a queen, but to Naima, it was a gilded cage, taking her to a fate she could not escape. As the warlord gave the signal, the procession began its journey out of Banjoko. Drums pounded in the distance, warriors rode in a fierce formation, and villagers bowed their heads, unwilling to watch the horror unfold. Kezia sighed in satisfaction, running her fingers over the heavy gold. "We have won, my son," she whispered to Tajiri. "We will never be poor again." Tajiri stared at the fortune before him, the glint of gold almost blinding. He had everything he had ever wanted. Yet as he watched the caravan disappear into the horizon, a strange emptiness settled in his chest. He had traded blood for wealth, and somewhere deep inside him, a storm was already brewing. The drums pounded through the night, their deep, rhythmic echoes shaking the very ground beneath the feet of those gathered. Torches lined the grand courtyard of Kano's fortress, their flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. The air was thick with tension, a strange mixture of festivity and fear. Warriors stood in rigid formation, their faces expressionless, their swords gleaming under the moonlight. Villagers, dressed in their finest, yet trembling with unease, whispered amongst themselves, afraid to speak too loudly. At the center of it all, Naima stood motionless, adorned in the finest silks, gold jewelry weighing heavily against her skin. The fabric was rich, the embroidery intricate, a dress fit for a queen. yet she felt nothing but suffocation. She was surrounded by opulence, yet her heart was drowning in misery. The ceremony was unlike anything she had ever seen. No songs of joy, no laughter, no warmth, only the calculated movements of men who feared their leader, and the empty praises of those too afraid to displease him. Kano sat on his high throne, his piercing gaze never leaving her. There was power in his presence, an unshakable force that made even the strongest men cower. He had taken countless women before, but none had dared to defy him. None had ever looked at him the way Naima did now, with quiet resistance burning in her eyes. She walked to the altar with slow, deliberate steps, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The village priest, his voice shaking, recited the sacred words, binding her to a man she despised. Every vow, every blessing felt like a chain tightening around her soul. "You belong to me now," Kano declared, his voice firm, final. Naima did not respond. She did not tremble. She did not weep. Instead, she stood still, her face unreadable, her silence louder than any scream. Kano's jaw tightened. He was used to fear. He was used to submission. But this silence, this defiance hidden behind a mask of obedience, it unsettled him in a way he did not understand. The warriors roared in celebration, raising their cups, but Kano's sharp eyes never left his new bride. He had conquered countless lands, broken countless souls, yet tonight he felt something unfamiliar, doubt. Naima may have stood before him as his wife, but deep in her heart she knew this was not the end of her story. This was only the beginning. The night was still, the air heavy with the scent of burning incense. The grand palace, which had moments ago been alive with the echoes of celebration, now stood eerily silent. The corridors were empty, save for the flickering torches casting uneasy shadows along the walls. Inside the royal chamber, Kano sat on the massive bed, his dark eyes fixed on the woman before him. Naima stood in the center of the room, her expression unreadable. She was draped in the finest silk, golden bangles shimmering against her wrists, her hair braided with jewels fit for a queen. But beneath the beauty, there was something else, something Kano could not quite place, a quiet defiance, a storm hidden behind those dark, piercing eyes. He smirked, running a hand over his jaw. "You are mine now," he said, his voice low, commanding. "You will obey me." Naima said nothing. Instead, she moved closer, her steps slow, deliberate. Kano watched her carefully, his confidence unshaken. He had taken many wives before. They all resisted at first, but in the end, they always broke. She reached him, lowering herself onto the bed beside him. Her scent was intoxicating, sweet, alluring. Her lips, painted a deep red, curved into the faintest of smiles. Then, she leaned in. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then it happened. A sudden gasp tore through the silence. Kano jerked back, his body stiffening as a sharp, searing pain shot through his veins. His chest tightened, his limbs grew heavy, and within seconds, his powerful frame collapsed onto the bed. The Warlord, the undefeated conqueror, was helpless. His breath came in short, ragged bursts as he tried to move, to lift even a single finger, but his body refused to obey. His vision blurred, and through the haze, he saw Naima rise, standing over him like a ghostly figure. A soft chuckle escaped her lips. "Did you think I would be an easy conquest, Kano?" she whispered, tilting her head. His eyes widened, rage and confusion battling for control. "What have you done?" His voice was barely a whisper now, his throat burning as if fire coursed through his blood. Naima leaned down, her fingers trailing along his jaw. "You are strong, Kano, but even the strongest can be brought to their knees." She lifted her hand to her lips, wiping away the red stain. "My mother taught me well. She was a healer, but she was also a survivor. She knew the secrets of nature, of poisons that could kill, and those that could only weaken. The one I used on you," she smirked, "not fatal, but enough to make you feel powerless." Kano's breathing grew shallow as realization dawned on him. He, the most feared warlord in the land, had been outmatched, not by a sword, not by an army, but by the very woman he had claimed as his own. Outside the chamber, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the palace halls. The guards, alerted by Kano's muffled cries, stormed into the room, their weapons drawn. They froze at the sight before them, their mighty leader writhing in agony, and Naima, standing over him, her expression calm, unshaken. The silence stretched, thick with disbelief. No one moved. No one spoke. Naima exhaled slowly, turning her gaze to the warriors. "Your master is not dead," she said simply. "But tonight, he has learned a lesson he will never forget." And with that, she stepped back, her heart steady, her victory silent yet deafening. Naima's heart pounded as she slipped through the dark corridors of the fortress, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The palace was in chaos, guards shouting, footsteps echoing against the stone walls. They were searching for her, but she had no intention of being caught. She moved swiftly, her bare feet silent against the cold floor, her mind racing. The poison had worked. Kano was paralyzed, helpless. But he wouldn't stay that way forever. If she wanted to live, she had to escape now. A shadow moved ahead. She froze, pressing herself against the wall. A figure emerged from the darkness. An old man, cloaked in a flowing robe, his piercing eyes meeting hers. "Come," he whispered. His voice was low but firm. Naima hesitated. She didn't know him, but something about his presence felt familiar. He turned without another word, disappearing into the shadows. She followed. The man led her through a hidden passage, deeper into the fortress, through tunnels she had never known existed. The air was damp, the path winding. After what felt like hours, they emerged into the dense forest beyond the palace walls. The night air was cool against her skin, but her mind burned with questions. She turned to face the old man. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man smiled, his weathered face illuminated by the moonlight. "I am Zuberi," he said, "and I have been watching over you since you were a child." Naima frowned. "Why?" Zuberi's eyes darkened. "Because you are not just anyone, Naima. You are the daughter of King Mwando of Zalengwa." Naima's breath caught in her throat. "My father," Zuberi nodded. "Yes, the rightful king of a hidden kingdom, betrayed and killed years ago." He paused, his expression hardening. "By Kano." Naima staggered back. The world around her seemed to spin. Kano had murdered her father. The man who had taken her as his wife, who had tried to own her, had been the one to destroy her family. Rage surged through her veins like fire. Zuberi placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your father was a great ruler, but Kano wanted power. He invaded Zalengwa, destroyed your people, and took the throne for himself." Naima's hands clenched into fists. "And my mother, she died protecting you," Zuberi said softly. "She smuggled you out of Zalengwa before Kano's men could find you. I was sent to keep watch over you, waiting for the day you would learn the truth." Naima felt a storm brewing inside her. All her life, she had been told she was nothing, a girl with no power, no future. Yet here she stood, the heir to a kingdom she had never known, the daughter of a fallen king. Zuberi's eyes held steady. "You are the last hope of Zalengwa, Naima, and now it is time for you to reclaim what is yours." Naima straightened, her fear melting away. She had been sold, betrayed, and nearly destroyed, but she was still standing, and now she had a war to fight. Tajiri had once walked through the village of Banjoko, with his head held high, basking in the admiration of those who once saw him as nothing more than a poor, forgotten boy. But now, the streets were different. The whispers that once spoke of his sudden wealth had turned into curses. The eyes that once looked at him with envy now burned with hatred. Everything he had gained was slipping through his fingers like sand. Kessia was the first to disappear. One morning, he awoke to find the house empty. His stepmother, the woman who had promised him power, had fled. The chests of gold, the silk garments, the rare jewels that Kano had given him in exchange for his own sister, gone. Everything was gone. He searched frantically, his mind racing, but there was no trace of her. She had taken everything and vanished like a ghost in the night. Tajiri was left with nothing. No money, no allies, no future. The villagers watched him crumble. The same people who had once envied his fortune now spat at his feet when he passed. "Betrayer," they hissed. "You sold your own blood for gold, and now even the gold has abandoned you." He tried to explain, to defend himself, but his words fell on deaf ears. No one cared for his excuses. No one pitied his fall. Desperation clawed at him. With nowhere else to turn, he made a reckless decision. The palace, the very fortress where he had last seen Naima, the place where she had been taken away like a prisoner. Surely, Kano would still honor their agreement. Surely, the Warlord would not cast him aside like worthless trash. But Tajiri had underestimated the brutality of the world he had once tried to buy his way into. As he stepped past the gates, exhausted and desperate, he was met with cold steel against his throat. Kano's warriors, now leaderless and restless, surrounded him. Their eyes, filled with the hunger of vengeance, locked onto him like a predator cornering its prey. "This one of them growled, was the snake who sold his own sister. Tajiri opened his mouth to plead, to explain, but before he could utter a word, a fist crashed into his face. He crumpled to the ground, the taste of blood filling his mouth. There was no mercy left for him, no riches to save him, no stepmother to manipulate his way out of trouble. The same hands that had once taken gold from Kano in exchange for his own sister were now bound in chains, and as he was dragged through the same halls where Naima had once been imprisoned, he finally understood. Betrayal always comes with a price, and his was just beginning. Naima rode through the dense forests of Zalengwa, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The towering trees whispered secrets of the past, and the wind carried the echoes of a name she had only just begun to understand, her own. She was no longer just Naima, the girl who had been betrayed and sold. She was Naima, the rightful ruler of Zalengwa. Zuberi, the old sage who had been her silent protector, led her deeper into the hidden kingdom. When they finally reached the heart of Zalengwa, Naima's breath caught in her throat. The city, hidden away for years, was still standing. The golden walls of the palace, though worn by time, shone under the sunlight. The people, weary and broken from years of oppression, stared at her with cautious hope. Zuberi stepped forward, his voice firm. "Your queen has returned." For a moment, silence stretched over the crowd. Then, one by one, the people fell to their knees. Murmurs of her name spread like wildfire. She was the daughter of their fallen king, the princess they had believed lost forever. But Naima knew that reclaiming her throne was only the beginning. She had suffered too much to let her enemies roam free. Tajiri had betrayed her. Kessia had plotted against her. Kano had stolen her family, her freedom, and almost her life. Now it was her turn to take everything back. She spent days training with Zalengwa's strongest warriors, sharpening her skills, learning the art of battle. Her mind was sharper than any blade, her resolve stronger than any shield. She would not be a queen who ruled from the shadows. She would fight alongside her people, lead them with fire in her veins and justice in her hands. The villagers, once fearful and broken, now stood tall behind her. Farmers took up spears. Blacksmiths forged weapons in her name. Mothers sent their sons to train. Fathers taught their daughters to wield bows. They were no longer just survivors. They were warriors. Naima stood before them, her voice echoing through the land. "For years we have lived in fear. We have bowed to those who stole from us, who betrayed us. But no more. I will not rest until every wrong is made right, until those who thought they could break us learn the true strength of Zalengwa." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices merging into a battle cry that shook the very earth beneath them. Naima was no longer the helpless girl who had been sold into the hands of a monster. She was a queen, and she was coming for revenge. The night was thick with anticipation, as Naima and her warriors stood at the edge of Kano's stronghold. The once mighty fortress, feared by all, now lay vulnerable under the weight of its own cruelty. The torches along its walls flickered weakly, and the guards, unaware of the storm about to descend upon them, laughed and drank without worry. Naima's heart pounded like a war drum. She had waited for this moment, for the chance to face the man who had stolen everything from her, the man who had thought he could break her. With a single signal, her warriors moved like shadows, swift and precise. The first line of defense fell before they could even reach their weapons. The remaining guards, caught between sleep and drunken stupor, barely had time to react before they were surrounded. Then, the doors to the throne room were kicked open. Kano sat lazily on his grand seat, a goblet in his hand, his face twisted in arrogance. But when he saw Naima standing before him, his expression shifted from disbelief to fury. "You!" he spat, struggling to rise. His once mighty body was still weak from the poison she had used against him on their wedding night. He was no longer the powerful warlord that terrorized villages. He was just a man, fragile and exposed. Naima stepped forward, her voice cold and steady. "Did you think I would run forever?" Kano's warriors scrambled to defend him, but Naima's army was stronger, faster, and driven by justice. The battle was swift, a storm that left no room for mercy. Within moments, the once mighty warlord was dragged from his throne, his hands bound, his eyes filled with rage and fear. Then came Tajiri. He was barely recognizable, his clothes tattered, his face gaunt, his once proud posture hunched over in shame. He had fled to Kano's stronghold in desperation, seeking protection. But now he stood trembling before the sister he had betrayed. He fell to his knees, his voice cracking. "Naima, please, forgive me." Silence hung between them. The brother she had once loved, the boy she had trusted, was nothing more than a shell of what he used to be. "You sold me for gold," she said, her voice unwavering. "Did you think you could escape the weight of that sin?" Tajiri sobbed, gripping the hem of her robe, but Naima did not flinch. "You will not die by my hands," she said, stepping back, "but you will live with the burden of what you have done." With a single command, Tajiri was stripped of his name, his wealth, and his home. He was exiled, left to wander the lands with nothing but the memory of his betrayal. As for Kano, there would be no quick death for him, no honor in battle, no escape. "You built your empire on fear," Naima whispered to him. "Now you will rot in the darkness of your own making." Kano was dragged into the very dungeon he had once thrown countless innocent souls into. The iron door slammed shut, and with it, his reign of terror ended. The stronghold was no longer a place of nightmares. It was a symbol of justice, of strength, of a queen who had reclaimed her throne. The winds of change swept through Zalengwa like a cleansing river, washing away the stains of tyranny and fear. Under Naima's rule, the kingdom, once hidden in the shadows of war and oppression, began to flourish in ways no one had imagined. The lands that had been left barren under Kano's greed were now teeming with life. Farmers returned to their fields, merchants reopened their shops, and laughter echoed in the streets where silence and terror had once reigned. Naima ruled not with an iron fist, but with wisdom and compassion. She did not seek revenge, only justice. She made sure that the people who had suffered under Kano's rule were given the support they needed to rebuild their lives. The women who had been stolen from their families were given back their dignity. The warriors who had been forced to fight for a cruel master were given the choice to serve a just queen or return home in peace. News of Naima's rise spread beyond Zalengwa's borders, reaching villages and kingdoms far and wide. People whispered of the girl who had been betrayed by her own brother, sold into the hands of a monster, only to rise from the ashes and reclaim her destiny. She became a legend, a symbol of resilience and justice. But the greatest lesson was learned in the village of Banjoko, the place where greed had poisoned the hearts of men, where betrayal had torn families apart. The people there saw the fate of Tajiri, wandering aimlessly, stripped of all he once valued. They saw the ruin of Kessia, who had fled with stolen gold, only to be captured and punished in a distant land where she had no power. The villagers understood then that wealth gained through treachery was nothing but an illusion, and that true strength lay in loyalty, wisdom, and kindness. Naima's reign was not just a new chapter for Zalengwa, it was the beginning of a new era, one where no child would be sold for gold, no ruler would wield fear as a weapon, and no one would be silenced by injustice. And so, the kingdom thrived, and Naima's story was told for generations, a tale of a betrayed stepsister who outwitted a warlord, proving that even in the darkest of times, light will always find a way to shine. Think about Naima's journey, her pain, her betrayal, and her rise from the ashes. She was sold like an object, discarded by the very person who should have protected her. But did she break? Number. She fought, she endured, and she emerged stronger than anyone ever imagined. This is not just a story, it's a lesson that no matter how cruel the world is, no matter how deep the betrayal, justice will always find its way. Those who build their lives on greed and deceit will always face their downfall, and those who stand firm, who refuse to bow to cruelty, will rise. How many Naimas exist in the world today? How many innocent souls suffer at the hands of those who should love them? If this story moved you, if it made you feel even an ounce of Naima's pain, then let her voice be heard. Like this video so that more people can see her story. Share it so the message of justice and resilience reaches far and wide. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because stories like this need to be told, and together we will make sure they are never forgotten. Thank you for watching. Your support keeps these stories alive. Stay strong, stay kind, and never stop believing in justice.